Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. Today, we're going to take a look at how we think. How do we plan for the future? What is the rationale behind many of our decisions? And hopefully, we're going to learn some new ways of thinking. My guest is someone who's very involved in this. Mr. Tim Ward is the author, teacher, world traveler, and the publisher of Changemakers Books. Tim, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Bill, it's my pleasure to be your guest.
I appreciate you being with me today. That was quite a coverage there at first. We're going to change our way of thinking. We're going to have to do that very quickly, I think, as we look at these problems we have in the future. But let's talk about Changemaker Books first. You're involved with a colleague of ours, Rick Smyer, who's a well-known futurist and someone who wrote the book Communities of the Future a few years ago. How did you get involved with Rick, and how does this book play into this overall concept of how we think and how we develop our planning processes, I guess?
Well, Rick approached me about, 5 years ago now, with an idea for a great book uh, about the future. And I was stunned by this. When I started reading about it, it exposed me to a whole set of ideas that I'd never really seen before. And the title we finally came up with was Preparing for a World That Does Not Exist Yet. How do you do that? How do you prepare for the future? Well, Changemakers Books is all about what are the changes people need to make, societies need to make to adapt to our ever evolving circumstances. So to me, this was a perfect match. And Rick and the whole network of communities of the future that he was involved with exposed me to all of these ideas. And we put this book out, and it was really one of our best sellers. So that left me quite open to doing more and becoming more involved with communities of the future. So I went to some very important meetings that the groups have, and I've gotten to know several of the other people in that community, and have gone on to publish books by some of them as well. So I think, given where we are today, where change is not only coming at us fast, but often in ways that seem quite unpredictable, being able to better cope with a future that we don't fully understand is really one of the most important things that we can do, both individuals and as organizations and as a society. You can no longer forecast like a weather person, looking at yesterday's weather pattern and predicting what it's going to be like tomorrow, because the future is coming too fast in ways that are too unpredictable.
And before I forget it, I want to mention your website, changemakers-books.com, so that our viewers can go to the website and check out that and many other books. Might also mention too that Rick has been on Global Connections television at least 3 times I can think of, and he's on our website at globalconnectionstelevision.com, along with some of the other people whom I'm sure will be involved in this whole series that you're developing, such as Dr. John Cobb and some other really eminent futurists, futurologists, whatever we want to call them. Now, you're in the process of developing a series of books. These will be, I guess, long articles or something like that. I'm not sure what you're calling it. But how do you plan to bring all of that together? And when do you think it might be available?
Well, so to answer the first question, uh, these are going to be a series of books under the title Communities of the Future, which are going to be about what it takes for community leaders, be they officials like mayors or council people or business persons, chambers of commerce, Rotary clubs, community civil groups. What does it take for them to help get their communities up and running as the pandemic starts to leave us, and we're no longer subject to the kind of lockdowns and economic and medical emergencies that we've seen for the past year? It's very likely the Biden administration is going to be pumping a whole lot of resources for communities, and we've been suffering. People are suffering, communities are suffering. They're going to have to hit the ground running. So they need to know, how do we do what the Biden campaign has called Build Back Better? How do we actually do that, given that the future is still so unpredictable? So there's this moment in time, this crux between the need for fast development, fast change, and making sure that all these resources don't go to waste because we've made poor decisions, because we haven't been able to conceive of what the future will actually look like. Communities of the Future has the perfect collection of people who've got just the right ideas in all these different sectors, from education to healthcare to business, to help community leaders put these plans in place, put these ideas into action. And the moment is now. Well, the moment is now, but you know, to publish a book, Bill, as many of your viewers know, it takes about a year and a half just to do the publishing. Once a book is written, it's often a 3-year process. This is something that I actually pioneered in the past year. When the pandemic first hit, I put out a whole series of books called Resilience to give people the skills they needed to cope with the challenges of the pandemic in 40 days. I got a group of authors together. I gave them 3 weeks to write the book. My publishing company worked at warp speed to produce the books in 2 weeks instead of 3 months. And we skipped over all the stuff that you need to do to get books straight into bookstore because the bookstores were all closed. We just went straight to Amazon and other online retailers. But we provided the proof of concept. I've since done this with another series called Resetting Our Future. And for 2021, my goal is to take all these incredible futurist resources, turn them into books, and get them into the hands of community leaders, players in all these different realms of development to help America get back on its feet fast. I predict the book should be out by the end of the spring.
At the
They
end of the
haven't been
spring.
started. They haven't started writing them yet.
Well, that's warp speed in the publishing world, as you know. That's very fast. I think
Yeah.
it's very interesting too, because this whole concept, what you were talking, I think you accurately summed it up there when you said we have to be more effective, we have to be more efficient, and we have to move much more rapidly than we have in the past. And we've had a little one blunder after another over the past couple of years, but we cannot do it anymore, especially when it comes to dealing with COVID-19, dealing with climate change, dealing with some of the hot spots in the world, like the Middle East, especially with the nuclear Iranian situation. So we have to move forward on this. You're involved interacting with some of the most brilliant people probably in the world. And we're talking about here in the United States, but these concepts really, they apply worldwide, do they not? They're global.
Absolutely. And the thing is, it's not just about learning new concepts that you can plug into your 5-year plan. It's about learning how to function, how to work in connected networks of others in very different ways than we're used to. You know, the 5-year plan, that doesn't work where technology and is changing things so fast, yet alone where climate change is producing unpredictable weather patterns. You can't simply build back better. You really have to build quite differently. And if we can't see the future better than we've done in the past, we're going to end up, you know, building for the 19th century instead of for the 21st century. It's it's potential catastrophe if people don't get this right. We don't have time to go slow and fail along the way. We've got to be at the top of our game. And that's my hope for this series, is that these brilliant thinkers will help people see it's not just about getting a new mindset. And Rick was the one who corrected me on this. He said, it's not about a new mindset. We need a mind flex, the ability to have leaders with the kind of flexible, adaptive thinking that they can cope with the rapid chase of pain, rapid pace of change.
That's right. And when you say a 5-year plan, you're pretty well locked into doing certain things a certain way. And if you have failures, whatever, you might just keep plodding ahead. But it sounds to me like you're, again, I'm not an expert in this area, but it sounds like to me you're putting together an ecosystem of diverse yet transformational ideas with transformational thinkers. Does that sound right?
That's right. And the word ecosystem is such a great metaphor. It doesn't actually have anything to do with the environment, but ecosystem here does mean a system in which each player is connected with the others in such a way that as one succeeds and thrives, they help others succeed and thrive. A brilliant author who's part of this broader network named Victor Huang wrote a book called The Rainforest, in which he really thoroughly explores this way in which businesses and organizations aren't competing against each other in a survival of the fittest, but they are working to help each other create the right conditions to grow and thrive together, like a rainforest, one big interconnected living system. Now, that's the challenge, to take our almost Newtonian-like economic system and turn it into a biological living system that thrives together. Huge shift in thinking.
It certainly is, and it's one that we have to do. We cannot wait any longer. Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. We'd invite our viewers to go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view previous programs. Also, if you're involved with a PBS or community access television station, or perhaps an educational institution that has an intra-campus television hookup, or you just have a computer, you have a website, you like our shows, you'd like to share them, please feel free to do so. Global Connections Television is provided at no cost as a public service to help us better understand international issues and how they impact our lives. Today, we're talking with Mr. Tim Ward, and we're talking about a very important topic, and that is how we deal with the current issues and the issues that are looming on the horizon. We see climate change, we see many others that are out there, and we have to have transformational thinking. We can't just reform some particular system and hopefully that's going to work. So that's the crux of our discussion. But Mr. Tim Ward is an author, he's a publisher, a teacher, a world traveler, and publisher of Changemakers Books. Tim, we're focusing on transformational thinking, not just reforming, but transformational thinking. How is this idea? Now we're talking about folks you're dealing with in the United States, but have you seen any of that from overseas? I don't know if it may be in the embryonic stage. I'm just not too sure, but it's a concept that will undoubtedly be out around the world, I'm sure, shortly.
Yes, definitely. There are, of course, many, I guess you could call them nodes of transformational thinking in Europe. And I will say I've run into it organizationally as well. In my work as a communications teacher and consultant, I had the good fortune of working with the Green Climate Fund, that UN-sponsored agency that was set up several years ago before the Paris Accords to help funnel money from rich countries to poor countries to help them adapt and mitigate climate change. So working with the executive director from the very start, she told me, look, we have to build an international organization while we are also fundraising and running it. She said, really, I feel like I'm piloting an airplane while it's being built, and we're making decisions about how to do the design and where we want to fly it all at the same time. So talk about the future
Very
coming at you fast.
aptly described.
Yeah.
It certainly is.
Yeah.
That's for sure. I'm glad you mentioned climate change because we're dealing with COVID, we're dealing with many other problems, but climate change, in the opinion and scientific evidence of many folks who know quite a bit about this, is our number one problem. Now, you've got another website I want to mention and it ties right into what you're talking about. It's resettingourfuture.com. And what is the resettingourfuture.com and how does climate change tie into that?
This is my current series of books that is halfway out. We've got 6 books published last fall, 6 more due in this spring. And it is about this amazing, hard moment of time when the pandemic has killed millions of people and will likely kill millions of more across the world, when our economies ground to a halt in order to stop the transmission of the disease. There's been incredible suffering this year. But as I think it was Winston Churchill, maybe the one credited with this, never waste a good crisis. I started thinking about this last year and thought, are we going to be the victims of this? Will this be remembered by history as a moment that humanity was crushed by a pandemic? Or can we use it to put ourselves on a different track? We know that the other things in our future we have to solve: climate change, growing inequality, the kinds of violence due to systemic racism and gender issues that are still unresolved. We see some big things that have been not moving forward at a pace that's fast enough. Can we use this crisis as proof that we can make big changes when we have to? Everybody used to say, oh, you can't stop the global economy because of climate change. Well, guess what? We stopped it because of a pandemic that had a 2% mortality rate. So we can do these things. The pandemic is evidence of how flexible we actually can be. So I wanted to get ahead of the curve here and get some authors with big change-making ideas that were pragmatic at the same time. Didn't just say, oh, we can solve climate change, or oh, we can address inequality. But I said to each of them, show me the path, put a flag on the hill. That's what we could do. And show me the path. How do we get there? How can people follow this so that we could start to make these big shifts that we have perhaps a one in a lifetime opportunity to make? And indeed, as you know, as your viewers know, as well as you and I do, Bill, if we don't make these big changes, we are really sunk when it comes to climate change.
The game is over. The ship will sink. There's no doubt about it.
Mm.
And you're absolutely right. And we've heard these arguments in the past, especially when we're talking about moving from dirty fuels like, well, basically all the fossil fuels, your coal, oil, gas, that type of thing, to clean energy. And there are countries that are doing it right now. Some are getting close to 90, 100% totally non-fossil fuel societies, and it can be done. And they're actually creating more jobs. They're losing some jobs in the coal area or whatever, or in the petroleum extraction industry or whatever the case might be. But they're creating other jobs that are higher paying, safer, and really are much better for society and don't leave much of a carbon footprint. So we've got to rethink the way we're doing things. You had mentioned before we run out of time, you had mentioned you were involved with the United Nations Green Fund, and that is extremely important. So I recall, I think it was $100 billion that was committed by the countries of the world. I may be wrong on that figure. I think that was it, but again, don't hold me to that. But that the UN has led the way in promoting a discussion of this climate problem. It really got launched in 1992 at the UN Conference on Environment and Development in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And they've really led the way. What type of collaboration were you doing with them? Were you talking about the scientific part, or bringing scientists together, or how did that work?
I was working with the organization, the Green Climate Fund, at the heart of this. The developed nations pledged $100 billion a year to help poorer countries make this transition. But the fund got a working budget of about $10 billion for its first 3 years. It's just been replenished for another $10 billion. They had to raise this from donors. And they then used that to create deals to connect with other large development financiers, including private sector, to build out what needs to be that $100 billion commitment. But it includes working with large organizations like the World Bank and others who also have significant climate budgets. Working together and collaboratively, they've got a good shot at this, especially now that we've got a government here in the United States that has said it's going to get back into the Paris Accords. The Trump administration actually reneged. It clawed back $2 billion of the initial US commitment to the Green Climate Fund. We're waiting to see how quickly Biden will live up to that pledge that President Obama made and began to act on when the fund was first created. So it's an organization which is trying to catalyze massive change. Literally, how do you take billions and direct it towards not just hundreds of billions, but ultimately trillions, which is what we need to truly refashion and rebuild our economy so that it works in harmony with nature instead of destroying it.
And of course, as you mentioned, the Paris Climate Accord was absolutely critical to this, because it brought basically all the countries of the world together. And then, of course, the US dropped out. But this is something that we need to get back into, because the US has to play a leadership role, whether it wants to or not. And that doesn't always mean putting up the money, but it does mean getting involved and working with our allies and some people who maybe are not our allies, and moving it forward. Well, Tim, what do you see as far as some of the major challenges you're going to be confronting in the climate change area, but also as far as a discussion of transformational thinking, or transformational ways of planning, if you will?
One of the biggest challenges people have is it's easy to sort of go off in 100 different directions and to fragment their efforts. So people that are working on social justice are over here. People that are working on climate are over here. People that are working on economic recovery are over here, and everybody's in their own separate silo. One of the things that I'm coming to see is that if we could approach these all as part of one problem or one issue. How does humanity live on the planet and thrive with each other in nature? Then we could maybe see that the climate challenge can only really be solved when all people, including those who right now are dispossessed or feel aggrieved, when they are on board with that. That the real challenge to climate change is not technical; it's having everybody want to do the work. Um, the same thing with our economic recovery. If we see is the economy over here and the environment over here as they're opposed, then we're not going to move forward. So how can you draw these threads together? And the place where I've seen the most exciting stuff is on some very front forward thinking on climate change here in the United States. I've been working with a group called ACE, the Agenda for Climate Empowerment, that have recently put together a strategic framework for how all the actors in the US could come together and all get on the same page. And social justice is a big part of doing this well. Bringing private sector in is a big part of doing this well. We're actually publishing a book as part of the Reset series that summarizes the strategic framework on this report. Anybody who's curious could look up the ACE strategic framework, the Agenda for Climate Empowerment. They'll find the report, and they will also find the book on Amazon.com. But this is a really new way of thinking to bring those threads together and start to see we've really got one problem. People can work on different aspects of it, but it's all connected.
Now, are the people who are participating, I've never heard of ACE. It sounds like a great organization.
It
And of
is.
course, there are tens of thousands out there working on this problem. Are they composed, or is this group composed of private business people, non-governmental organizations, the general public, scientists, just a wide range of people who have an interest in
Absolutely.
helping us survive for another 100
Absolutely.
years or more?
Government agencies, communities, municipalities, networks, whether they're business networks or social networks. It was a collaboration of over 150 organizations and many, many hundreds of individuals. And this first step is just getting the framework for this yet to be developed strategy. You know what? This ACE work, it's in the UNFCCC. It's something that is required by the Paris Climate Accords that every nation do this. The US is the only nation that's gotten this far. We're on track. It could happen that we could get the plan finished in time for the big climate accords meeting later this year. That actually gives the US a chance to get back into a leadership role with climate after 4 years of not just sitting on the sidelines, but making matters worse. So I'm really excited about this work. And it's the kind of transformation the communities of the future is all about new thinking, about bringing people together, about working in ways that we haven't worked before.
And you're right. The United States has not only been on the sidelines in just about every area, to be quite honest, but certainly when it comes to climate and the economic situation around the world too. But this ACE is a fascinating approach, and I'm so glad you brought it up. We'll have to talk later off screen or offline about doing an interview with some of those folks. But Tim Ward, it's been a really fascinating discussion we've had today. And I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
My pleasure. And I wish all of your viewers the opportunity to use their power of just being alive and having creative ideas and the energy to put them in place, to put that power to work, to really make the world a better place.
We will do it. We will do it. But again, I want to thank you again. And I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.